May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be always acceptable with you, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Several years ago, I became intrigued with a royal tradition that centered on Maundy Thursday. So intrigued that it became a ritual of mine during Holy Week to go online and discover where in her realm Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II had chosen to distribute that year's royal Maundy silver. Silver coins that had been specially minted for the yearly occasion. The recipients of the royal Maundy monies are pensioners with equal numbers of both men and women that represent the age of the monarch. Today, were it not for COVID-19, at a cathedral somewhere in Her Majesty's realm, 94 men and 94 women would have received the specially minted coins in a small white leather pouch. The tradition of the royal Maundy dates back several centuries and traditionally was held either in Whitehall or Westminster Abbey in London. This changed with the coming of the reign of Elizabeth II, who looks upon her travels throughout Great Britain as a pilgrimage and an important part of her role as the head of the church and the defender of the faith. It is interesting to note, however, that this tradition has evolved from one begun in 1210 by King John, in which the monarch went beyond the castle walls and washed the feet of the poor, an act that is, of course, directly linked to our gospel for tonight. I find it interesting that we as Episcopalians still refer to this day as Maundy Thursday, and that my friends and colleagues of all manner of other Christian denominations smile at me and say, oh, we call it Holy Thursday, as if somehow the term Maundy had lost its relevance. And I suppose that it has, or at least it could, if we don't know what the root of the word is, and exactly why the Church, in all her wisdom from her earliest days, has called this day Maundy Thursday. The word Maundy comes from the Latin mandatum, which means commandment. Our English word mandate shares the same Latin root. And it would be fair to say that there are actually two mandates that we hear of in the lessons from tonight's liturgy. The first mandatum we hear in tonight's lesson from Paul, when he describes the Last Supper in the locked upper room, with the mandate from Jesus to do this in remembrance of me, the command to institute the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist. However, the great commandment, the one we are called to always follow in our daily lives beyond the doors of St. Paul's, is the one we hear with the reading of John's Gospel. This mandate, this is our way of life. This is what sets us apart as Christians. You are to love one another as I have loved you. The disciples are fresh from the triumphant entry into Jerusalem, crowds cheering, chanting, waving branches, an entry fit for royalty, fit for a Messiah. The 12 have been traveling, listening, sometimes understanding, not always, but at least they're trying, and they have watched as the crowds gathered, expanded, and also became followers, and they were at the heart and center of it all. The triumph of the entry into Jerusalem could only mean one thing. Now the cruel and oppressive Roman occupation would be overthrown. Their enemies would be beaten down, and they would no longer ever again live in submission. And so they gathered in a secure, locked upper room to share the Passover meal, fully expecting to hear of how this mighty plan was going to take place. I suppose they should have expected it by now, after 3 years of hearing and seeing Jesus do the unexpected, or at least the not normal. I do wonder, though, what they must have felt when their leader, the one they fully expected to be exalted over all, embarked on the humbling practice of washing their feet. The washing of feet by a servant was customary, yet at this final gathering there were no servants to do the washing. And beyond that, in order to wash someone else's feet requires that the one do the washing assume a lowly position, kneeling or at least seated close to the ground. One does not wash another's feet while maintaining an upright position. Never, never a position of dominance, and not even a position of equality, but always one of servitude. And that is the point. Here was Jesus, their leader, the one they often referred to as Master or Lord or Rabbi, the one they had seen do miracles, the one they knew to be the Messiah, bending down and washing their feet like a common servant. Jeremy Taylor, Church of England cleric, wrote some, 350 plus years ago, and he chose to wash their feet rather than their head, that he might have an opportunity of a more humble position. And though we aren't told, my faith tells me that their feet weren't just washed with water. They were washed with unconditional love. And when Peter protests, Jesus' response is, "Unless I wash you, you have no part in me." For you see, the act of foot washing carries a meaning not only for the one who is doing the washing, but for the one who becomes vulnerable enough to allow their feet to be washed. Love one another as I have loved you. This is how people will know that you are my disciples, because you show love to one another and to the world. Strive for justice and peace in this world. Care for others as you would care for each other, and above all, love without condition. This is my commandment. This is your mission. This is the ever-breaking in reign of God. No mighty armies, not the beating down of the oppressor, just quiet, gentle, and unyielding servant ministry. And one final commandment to guide your lives. Love one another as I have loved you. Tonight begins the most dramatic 3 days of the Christian liturgical year. 3 liturgies that form a unitive arc across the 3 days. We will continue our liturgy tonight with the spiritual celebration of the Holy Eucharist, and then things will change. In actions that are meant to be rememorative, in the words of liturgist Kenneth Stevenson, we will, to the best of our ability in this time of COVID, strip the altar, or in our case, the credence table. But most importantly, the consecrated bread and wine, the presence of Christ in our midst, will be taken away. It will be removed to an altar of repose, where through the blessings of Zoom, we will have the opportunity to wait and watch and pray with Christ as we move toward the pain and the passion of Good Friday. As the deacon, I will not dismiss you this evening. There is no formal ending to this liturgy, no sending forth, for the liturgy does not end tonight, but rather it pauses so that we, like the pilgrims as far back as 4th century Jerusalem, can rest and refresh, so that tomorrow, either at noon or 7 p.m., we can virtually return to continue our journey with Christ, sharing in his passion and death. And here is the best news. The liturgy is not finished tomorrow either. Tonight is the beginning of our journey with Christ through his betrayal, his trial, his suffering and death, and then finally to our sure and certain hope, Christ's rising from the dead. Christ who gave himself for us, whose passion, pain, and death we remember over these 3 days. Christ who loves us without condition and asks only in return that we love one another as he loves us. Amen.